So we are going to work on more quadratic equations, but specifically we want to do something called completing a square and then use the quadratic formula. So before we're ready to do completing the square, I just want to kind of go back and recall something that maybe it's been a minute since we did. If you looked at x plus 3 squared, well, think about what does x plus 3 squared mean. X plus 3 squared means I have x plus 3 times x plus 3. So let's say we old school, like FOIL it out. So I have x times x, that's x squared. Then I have x times 3, that's 3x. Then I have this 3x, so we're going to write that again. And then I have 3 times 3, which is 9. What I want you to really pay attention to is you have this term that's the same, 3x and 3x. So we have x squared plus, I'm going to write it as 2 times 3x plus 9. I'm trying to really emphasize what we're looking at here is I have twice, right? So twice is 2. So I have x squared plus 6x plus 9. So anytime you're expanding something that looks like x plus a squared, we're going to get x squared plus 2ax plus a squared. So it's important to look at that too. I have twice whatever the term was. So 2 times 3, there's 6 with my x. If it was a minus, not much changes. If I have x minus a squared, it will be x squared minus 2ax and then plus a squared. So whatever sign is between the x and the a is the sign of the double term. This was a negative, so I have a negative 2ax. That's a shortcut. That helps us. So if I have x minus 5 squared, I can say that's x squared. 5 times 2 as 10x, and then 5 squared is 25. And I'm not having to do the FOIL. I can do this shortcut, but it's really important we're thinking about it was twice. So 2 times negative 5 was negative 10, 2 times 3 was 6. We are going to use this double thing. Okay, so here it's written a little more formally that if I have x plus b squared, I have x squared plus 2bx, plus b squared, or if it's x minus b squared, it's x squared minus 2bx plus b squared. So we have that double middle term. Okay, so completing the square is kind of like, let's make something squared that's not. So if I happen to have x squared plus bx, I would need to add b over 2 squared to get x plus b over 2 squared. Or if I had x squared minus bx, then I need to add negative b over 2 squared to get x minus b over 2 squared. What are we going back to? We're going back to this double in the middle. So if I didn't have the 2, then it would go over here. The relationship between this b and this 2b is that it's half. So here's this relationship between this b and then the squared is the half. So that's what we want to think about here. So let's try that. We're going to go super slow. So I have x squared plus 10x. I'm going to take 10 over 2 and square it. What does that give me? Well, 10 over 2 is 5, so it's x plus 5 squared. I'm not doing a lot of work, and I don't want you to do a lot of work. I don't need you to say, well, 10 over 2 is 5 and 5 squared is 25. Like, that's not really necessary. We're looking at this process that we're doing of what do we get. I could show it to you. Like, I could show you this is x squared, this is 10x, 10 over 2 is 5, 5 squared is 25. And if you think about it, factors of 25 that give me 10 would be x plus 5 times x plus 5. So there's no reason to do all this extra work. Let's do the shortcut. Okay, shortcut again is divide by 2. So this is negative 12x. I want to do, and I'm going to write it the long way, negative 12 over 2. Make sure you say squared. Negative 12 over 2 is minus 6. And notice the square moves outside of the parentheses. Okay, next one. X squared plus 6x plus what? What is 6 over 2? And you square it. 6 over 2 is 3. Now that square is outside of the parenthesis. One more, x squared minus 14x plus, I like to think about the sign with it, negative 14 over 2 squared. Negative 14 over 2 is minus 7, and it's squared. So our relationship is, take the coefficient of the single term, right? And that single term is the power 1 term. So whatever is power 1, I take that coefficient, I divide it by 2. If that number is positive, it'll be positive. If it's negative, it'll be negative. That's what I want to do. All right, so how does that help me? Let's take a look. Here I have x squared plus 6 14x plus 3 equals 0, and we're going to solve by completing the square. So I'll kind of show you how the completing the square helps. Number one, how it helps is there are not any factors of 3. They're going to add up to 16, right? The only factors of 3 are 3 and 1. 3 plus 1 is 4. That's not 16. So let's try this. Let's first just kind of give ourselves some space. And look, I gave a lot of space. I'm moving this 3 over to the other side, so it's going to be a negative 3. Okay. So I'm going to take 16, I'm going to divide it by 2, and I'm going to square it. Now, I've changed the left-hand side of the equation, so to keep equality, I need to add 16 over 2 also to the right. So what I do to the left, I do to the right. We just said we know what this becomes. This all becomes x plus 16 over 2 is 8 squared equals negative 3 plus 16 over 2 is 8. 8 squared is 64. Okay. Now I have x plus 8 squared. Negative 3 plus 64 is 61. At this point, I'm really going on to the square root method, right? Square root method says take the square to the left, take the square to the right. I get x plus 8 equals, remember it's plus or minus the square root of 61. I can separate that into two separate equations. X plus 8 equals the square root of 61. X plus 8 equals negative the square root of 61. X is then negative 8 plus the square root of 61. There's one solution. X is also negative 8 minus the square root of 61. There's my other solution. So we still have our two solutions to a power 2 equation, but we came to the solution a different way. We didn't factor, we didn't just take the square root. We had to do a little step to get it to a place where I could take the square root. We should try that some more. So here's another one where I can't factor it. And I can't just take the square root. I have x squared minus 8x plus 73 is 0. So that first step again is I am going to keep the x squared minus 8x on the left. I'm going to give myself a bunch of space. I'm moving the 73 to the right so it becomes negative. We're going to take the negative 8, divide it by 2, and square it. What I do to the left, I equally do to the right. Okay. X squared minus 8x plus negative 8 over 2 squared becomes x minus 4 squared. Remember, negative 8 over 2 is negative 4. That goes inside the parenthesis. The square is on the outside. I have negative 73 plus negative 8 over 2, we just said was negative 4. Negative 4 squared is 16. Let's keep going. X minus 4 squared equals, you can grab a calculator, negative 73 plus 16 gives you negative 57. At this point, I do have a squared term. That's what I wanted, and it's isolated. Square root of the left, square root of the right. X minus 4 equals, I took the square root. I write a plus or minus. This negative that's underneath the radical needs to come out of it. It's going to be an I at the end. If you look at 57, you could plug in your calculator. It's divisible by 3, but it's just 3 times 19. Nothing's going to come out of there, so we're just going to leave the 57 in there. I'm going to have two solutions. So if I break this up, let's do it the shorter way. If I move the 4 over, I would have 4 plus or minus the square root of 57, I. So we could say that's x equals 4 plus the square root of 57i. This is x equals 4 minus the square root of 57i. So I have that two solutions to this power 2 equation, but remember the plus and minus belongs to the square root of 57. It doesn't go with the 4. Make sure you have the right thing there. Let's square those off as our answer. Okay. Let's check out this one. I have 2x squared plus 28x plus 14 equals 0. Completing the square works when the coefficient of the x squared term is 1. Can't be negative 1, can't be 2, can't be anything else. So if you get a number that's not 1 as a coefficient for x squared, your very first step should be to divide. So now we have this simplified x squared. 20 over 2 is 14x, and then 14 over 2 is 7, and this is equal to 0. Probably not surprising. Once again, we have something that can't be factored, so we know what we're supposed to do. We're going to make it x squared plus 14x. We're going to move that 7 over to the right, so that means I'm subtracting. So I have x squared plus 14x is negative 7. Now let's take that 14, divide it by 2, and square it. since I added 14 over 2 to the left, I'm equally going to add it to the right. We know how to reduce this. This x squared plus 14x plus 14 over 2 becomes 14 over 2 is 7. I have x plus 7 squared equals negative 7. 14 over 2 is 7. 7 squared is 49. X plus 7 squared, negative 7 and 49 gives me 42. Okay. Now I have something squared on the left. I take the square root. I take the square root. X plus 7 equals plus or minus the square root of 42. You could look at 42 if you needed to, right? And you could say, well, like I could divide by 2 and it gives me 21. I can divide by 3 and it gives me 7. So if you need to do that quick check to see I can't reduce the radical, do that quick check just to make sure. I need to lastly move the 7 over. So I have negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 42. If you want to, then you could separate that into two solutions. So x is negative 7 plus the square root of 42. X is negative 7 minus the square root of 42. All right. Maybe that reminds you, with all these square roots and stuff, things are moving about, of the quadratic formula. Like I'm sure you've all seen this at some point before. What the quadratic formula is, it's the solution to any equation, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, where a, b, and c are reals. And a is just not 0, right? I have to have an x squared term for us to use this. So any quadratic that I can write as ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, I can solve using this formula. So this said x will be equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Everything here is important. It's important that it's ABC when you're putting it in. It's important that you do the negative, the plus or minus, that everything is divided by 2a. So just really pay attention, write it down, make sure you know it. I kind of write it every time I use it. That's how you learn formulas, is by repetition. So let's try this. I have x squared plus 9x plus 2 equals 0, and we are going to use the quadratic formula. So let me write it, negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And I can see a is 1, b is 9, c is 2. X is going to be equal to negative 9. Let's write that that's b. This is a. This is c. Plus or minus the square root. I have 9 squared minus 4. A was 1, c was 2, all over 2 times 1. Let's see what we can do with that. Negative 9 is fine. Plus or minus the square root. We'll do the long way. 9 squared is 81. 4 times 1 times 2, that's minus 8, all over 2. Use your calculator, whatever you need to do. 81 minus 8 is 73. So I have negative 9 plus or minus the square root of 73 all over 2. 73 does not reduce. That's as good as it's going to get. If you wanted to split it into 2, like to have x equals negative 9 plus the square root of 73 over 2, and then x is negative 9 minus the square root of 73 over 2, you can do that. I'm really fine with the plus or minus, and I would have in some of the other ones too, but just so you know, either format is fine. Okay, let's make it a little bit bigger. This time a is 7, b is 3, c is negative 5, x is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, x is negative 3 plus or minus the square root. I have 3 squared minus 4, a was 7, c was negative 5, all over 2 times 7. Here I have negative 3 plus or minus 3 squared is 9. This negative, 4 times 7 times negative 5, negative is positive. I have 4 times 7 times 5, that's 140. 2 times 7 is 14. Let's simplify. This is negative 3 plus or minus. I have the square root of 149 over 14. All right. Let's talk about the discriminant. So the discriminant is just a name for that b squared minus 4ac that was under the radical. So it's just that one little piece. But that little piece tells us a lot about the kinds of answers we're going to get for the quadratic equation. So there are 3 things that can happen. When I look at the discriminant, it can be positive, so that's what this is. If it's greater than 0, it could be negative, so less than 0, or it could be 0, right? So those are the three choices that we can get: positive, negative, so let's write that: positive, negative, or 0. When it's positive, you're going to have two real solutions. You're going to have something to add and subtract. And remember, it's under the radical, so when I get a positive number, right, I'm going to do the plus or minus, and that's why I have two solutions. If the number under the radical is negative, well, that means there's like an I, so you're going to have two complex solutions, so your plus or minus will have an I. If it's equal to 0, the square root of 0 is 0, so when I do the plus or minus 0, you'll still have the same number, so you're only going to have one solution, and it'll be that same solution twice. So if it was like 3 plus 0 is 3, 3 minus 0 is also 3, so I only have one. So two real, two complex, or just one real repeated solution. All right, so let's take a couple of applications just to finish this up. Let's say a gardener is planting a garden, and the length is going to be 10 feet longer than the width. We're going to set up a quadratic equation to find the dimensions of the garden. Given the area is 119 square feet, find the length and width of the garden. All right, so length and width says it's going to be a rectangle. It's not a pretty rectangle, but let's just say that's what we have. And it says the length is 10 feet longer than the width, so the length is 10 plus W. Okay, area of a rectangle is length times width. Our area is 119. The length was 10 plus W, and the width was W. So what do we have? We have 119. Let's distribute. I have 10W plus W squared. Quadratic has a power 2, but let's kind of rewrite this in a way we're used to. So let's write the W squared first. Let's put the 10W after, and then let's set it equal to 0, so this will be minus 119. So you have some choices of what to do here. You can try to factor it, or you could go to the quadratic equation. I kind of think like first thing I try to do is factor, because factoring is better. 119 is not a number that we're overly familiar with, but you just start going through numbers that you know. It is not even, right? 2, 4, 6, 8, don't have to worry about that. Again, that idea of 1 plus 1 plus 9, this gives me 11, which says 3 is not going to go in, so any multiple of 3 is not going to go in. So I start thinking about what other kind of numbers would I worry about, like 7 and 11, those are things I would try. So I put in my calculator 119 over 7, and it said 17, and you're like, that's awesome, because if 7 times 17 is 119, 17 minus 7 is 10, so that's perfect. So let's try that. So we're going to have 0 equals W, I have 17, I have 7. This negative sign says one of them is positive, one of them is negative. The bigger one is positive, the smaller one is negative. So W minus 7 is 0, which means W is 7. This also says W plus 17 is 0, which W is negative 17. Now I can't have negative 17 as a width. That doesn't make any sense. So this says the width is 17, or sorry, the width is 7. That was in feet. The length is 10 feet longer, so if I do 10 plus 7, I get 17 feet, and there's my answer. One more. The cost function. One more. The cost of X items is C of X is 60X plus 300. The revenue for X items is 100X minus 0.5X squared. Find the number of items that must be sold to produce a profit of 300. All right. So let's think about this. Revenue is the amount of money that a company receives from selling things. So let's say that's money received. Cost is money spent. So you can't make an item unless you have the materials to make the item. So you can't really do anything until you spend some money. Profit is the difference between the two. So profit is revenue minus cost. So our P of X, our profit that we're trying to come up with, will be our revenue which was 100x minus 0.5x squared, minus the cost. It's super important that you put the cost in parentheses because you need to subtract both the 60 and the 300. So let's expand that. 100x minus 0.5x squared minus 60x minus 300. Okay, so make sure you push that through. And also, we said we want the profit to be 300, so let's put a 300 over on the left. All right, let's pretty this up. Let's go in steps. I know I need it to be equal to 0, so this 300 is going to come over. So eventually, I'm going to move that 300 over. There's one x squared term. Let's put that there, negative 0.5x squared. 100 minus 60, that's plus 40x. And that 300 came over, so 300 minus another 300, that's negative 600. Okay. Again, you have choices. You could try to factor, you could go to the quadratic formula. Just this negative 0.5 at the beginning makes me think, let's just do the quadratic formula. So I'm going to have negative b, so that's negative 40, plus or minus the square root, b squared, so that's 40 squared, minus 4, a is negative 0.5, c is negative 600, all over 2a, which is negative 0.5. So negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, let's simplify that. So there's negative 40 plus or minus, let's just go ahead and do the whole thing at once. So 40 squared minus 4 times negative 0.5 times negative 600. This gives me 400. All over, do 2 times negative 0.5, which is negative 1. Okay. Pay attention to the signs, do every little step. You got to hold on to that negative 1 for now. So this says x equals, I have negative 40 plus or minus. I have that 400, so I want to take the square root of 400, which gives you 20. So I have plus or minus 20 over negative 1. Let's break that apart. I think it's important for this one. So I have negative 40 plus 20 over negative 1. When I do that, I have negative 40 plus 20 is negative 20 over negative 1, which is positive 20. So we can make 20 items. The other one says I have negative 40 minus 20 over negative 1. Negative 40 minus 20 is negative 60 over negative 1, which is also when I sell 60 items. So there's 2 different ways to make a profit of $300. One when it's at 20 and later when it's at 60. As we talk throughout the semester, we will talk about what this equation looks like. Why do I have 2 answers? There is this duplicity there. It's pretty much like saying the profit's going up and then it's coming back down. So you'll see that there will be doubling up of answers. So for now, we did get 2 answers. 2 answers is great. You can put them both in.